So when do you get to move in the house that you bought? Well, that's something that I, the realtor, and you, the client, should have a discussion about before we put an offer in on a house, because there's actually a term on the contract, meaning it can change from contract to contract. It depends on what the buyer and the seller agree to. Now, about 75% of the time, the buyer and seller agree that possession will change upon closing and funding, which means that both the buyer and the seller have performed closing at title, and the money has transferred from the buyer to the seller. Now, if you don't know what closing is, go check out my other videos on closing. I have one for the buyer and for the seller, what you do, what you have to bring, all that sort of thing. Go check that out. Another possibility is possession changing upon the terms of a lease. Now, you could either have a buyer's lease or a seller's lease. The buyer's lease is when a buyer wants to get into the house and move into the house before closing. So they won't actually own the house yet, but they want to move in first. So what you'll do, and this will happen sometimes when somebody's moving in town and closing may take 30 days, but they want to move in sooner and the house is vacant and the seller agrees that's okay. So what you can do is lease it from the seller, and then as soon as closing happens and funding, then you are no longer leasing and you are owning. So it's just like a lease. You can agree to how much you're going to pay rent, a deposit, if you can have pets, et cetera, et cetera. It's exactly like a lease if you've ever done a lease. So the other type of lease that we see a lot is the seller's lease, also called the leaseback. This happens when the seller wants to stay in the house that they just sold you after closing. So you own the house, but they would like to stay longer and they rent it from you. The reason that they would do that is oftentimes they're moving on to another house and they want time to find another house. So they can stay and lease the house from you while they find another house. And they got the funds from you buying the house, and now they can buy a house. It used to be done kind of backwards, where people would go put an offer in on a house with a contingency upon selling their house. But that's becoming very unpopular in 2022, especially in this market. So you'll see this quite a bit where sellers are selling their house but require a lease back or require a lease until so-and-so. And typically you'll see for 2 months or 3 months, I've seen them up to 6 months while people are waiting for their house to be built even. So those are the two different types of leases that you can do. And you can also do upon closing and funding. So you have 3 different options. Make sure you know what you want to do before you put an offer in on the house.